Okay, I want to talk about some fundamentals of database design, just basic concepts surrounding how to use and create databases. So, databases are essentially just places to store data. For example, maybe you have a thrift shop and you want to keep track of all the things you are selling. So you could create a database to hold that information about products and so forth. So there'll be some terminology I'll talk about, and the first two terms to be aware of when you're dealing with databases are tables and fields. So when we're talking about where you store the data, those are stored in tables. So a table is just where that information is kept. Fields are things inside that table that you want to keep track of. So going back to the thrift shop example, you might have a table where all your products are stored, where all the information about your inventory is stored. And then the fields in that table might be the product name, the price, maybe quantity, how many you have on hand. So the tables and fields in a database is just how data is structured, how data is represented in a database. You have tables that have the data in them, and those tables have fields that have more details about the information in the table. Let's look at a couple examples and it'll make a little more sense, or it'll start to. So here's an example of let's say we had a small car dealership or something and we want to keep track of cars in our car dealership. So we could create a table called cars, and then the fields inside again would just be things that you want to keep track of on a car. So you might have the make, the model, right? So these are the individual fields. The color, the VIN number. Each field would have information that describes the car. So that's the key. The fields describe the thing that you're keeping track of. So every car has a color and a price and a year of manufacture or what have you. So those are the things, or the fields, the details that we would add to the table to describe, keep track of our cars. One thing you'll run into that I want to talk about when you're designing your database tables and fields. What fields to put in, what not to. Here's what I mean. For cars, we could certainly keep track of a lot more information, right? We could keep track of what kind of transmission it has. So we could have a transmission field. We could keep track of how many doors does it have, number of doors. We could keep track of the color of the interior. So there's lots more fields if we sat here and tried to think of every possible thing that describes a car. So that's what the fields are. They're the things that describe that car. But from a database design standpoint, instead of trying to think of every possible thing, just include things that you want to keep track of. So if we don't care what color the floor mats are, we don't need to add that field just because it's a characteristic of a car. When you're designing your tables, just add the fields that you need. And that's another thing when we talk about why databases are so widely used, and that is the advantage of a database is you could always add additional fields later. So if we set this table up and we decided this was the structure, and then later we realized, well, we need to keep track of the sale price as well as the sticker price. We could add an additional sale price field here 6 months later, or whenever we decided we need it. So databases are expandable in that way, and that's one of the benefits of them. There's other benefits as well. Getting back to the tables and fields, let's look at one more example. So suppose let's think of a computer table, right? Maybe we sell computers and we wanted to create a table that has information about the computers. So the table would be computers, and the fields again would be things that every computer should have. So we might have RAM amount as a field, processor speed. who manufactures it, right? What's the brand of it? So each of these things that describe the computer could be created as fields inside that computers table. The type of computer here could be, is it a laptop? It is a desktop. So if we want to keep track of that information, we could store that in this type field. So these, again, fields just describe the computer. We could think of additional things here, and we could add more fields to this table as well. But these are just some examples of fields of things that might describe a computer in a computers table. I want to talk about one more concept relating to tables, fields, how data is described and represented in a database, and that is these terms that you might run across either in the field or in a textbook or when discussing databases. So we talked about tables and fields, right? Tables are the main little spot where the information is stored. The fields are the individual pieces of information in that table. You might hear them called entities and attributes. So those terms mean the exact same thing. They're basically interchangeable terms. So they might say, okay, create a table with 7 fields, or you might hear it described as that entity has several attributes. So tables, same as entities, fields are the same as attributes. Those are just common terms used to describe the structure of the data in a database.